Hello, thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Deb Green and I am the SANE coordinator for Sarah House. Today we're going to be talking about SANE exam equipment needs for mobile SANE programs. Our learning objectives for today will be to increase your knowledge of how a mobile SANE program functions and to identify the equipment needs for a mobile SANE program. I always like to start out by telling you a little bit about Sarah House and who we are and what we do. We are a nonprofit agency, and we do have offices in Fort Morgan, Sterling, and Yuma, Colorado. We are a dual service agency. As a child advocacy center, we provide forensic interviews, forensic exams, wellness exams, and advocacy for children and young adults ages 3 to 18 where allegations of child sexual and/or physical abuse have been made or they are witnesses to violent crimes. We also provide sexual assault and domestic violence services. Our services are confidential support through advocacy, education, financial assistance, trauma-focused therapy, and forensic medical examination to those impacted by sexual assault and/or domestic violence. Also, aside from providing direct services to victims, we also have participated in community education projects aimed at preventing, detecting, and combating sexual assault, dating violence, child abuse, and domestic violence. Our presence in the 13th Judicial District has been vital in assisting abuse survivors in this area. You may be wondering, as a nonprofit agency, where our funding comes from. All of our funding comes from grants, donations, and fundraisings. As you can see from this slide, 86% of our funding comes from federal grants, 8% comes from state grants, 4% foundation, and 2% comes from donations and fundraisings. We have two major fundraisers each year. One of our fundraisers is a prairie golf tournament. There's a local farmer who is a generous supporter of Sarah House, and every year he turns part of his farm into a golf course. Teams of 4 sign up for a morning of great fun and some friendly competition, all for a great cause. The second fundraiser is a 5K run walk, again held at this farm. It's a beautiful scenic run walk around the property in support of Sarah House. As I mentioned briefly before, we are serving the 13th Judicial District, which is a very large geographical area. We serve 7 counties in northeastern Colorado, which comes to a little over 11,000 square miles. We are the only provider in this geographical area that provides medical forensic exams for victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. We serve the counties of Morgan, Logan, Washington, Sedgwick, Phillips, Yuma, and Kit Carson. So for having such a large geographic area that we serve, we realized that we were not having very many survivors presenting to us for SANE exams, and we knew that statistically that number should have been much more. So we really wanted to look at the root, to kind of drill down and look at the root of that and figure out what the problem was that was preventing survivors to come in to us. And one of the things that we realized was that the biggest barrier to survivors getting the services they need often was that they would present to a hospital or an emergency department, and that hospital would not be able to provide the services that they need because they do not have SANE services at that particular facility. And they would be told then that they would have to go somewhere else to get the SANE exam. And in our case, that could be a very long distance away, even 2 hours or more away for them to come to where we are to be able to provide that exam. And so we really wanted to figure out a way that we could eliminate that, because when that happens, the survivor has to tell their narrative multiple times, and that's one thing that we really wanted to prevent from happening, because that's very re-traumatizing for the victim to have to go over this multiple times. And so our goal is always to try to minimize the number of times that the victim has to tell their story, because it is so re-victimizing. So we decided that the best solution to this problem was to take the care and services to the survivor. So if we could take our office, our exam room, to the victim and do the exam where they're at, that would be a much better solution. But how are we going to do that? How are we going to take an entire office, an entire exam room on the road to where the victim is? So that was kind of the birthplace of this idea that we needed to look into having a mobile SANE program. So where do we start? There was a lot of work that needed to be done in order to make this a reality. We needed to look at the hospitals in our area, in our district, to decide where we could actually make this happen at. We needed to look at the equipment that we would need and how that was going to be feasible to get all the equipment, and how we would transport that. We needed to look at just all the logistics and everything that needed to be done. And so the first thing we decided to do was that we would look at the hospitals and make a decision about where we would start in those 7 counties. We knew that we can't, do them all at once. And so we decided to start with 2 sites. And we decided that we would put them in the counties where we see the most cases initially. And then we would gradually branch out into other communities as we go along. But to start out with those couple of communities that we're seeing the most cases from, so that those victims were not having to come to us. So that's where we started, and decided we would grow out from there. So we needed to decide where we were going to start this project at, and we ended up deciding that we would use Morgan County and Logan County. So we selected, in Morgan County, there are 2 hospitals, one in Fort Morgan where our main office is located, and then there's a hospital in Brush, and so we decided to use the hospital in Brush. And then we also have the one hospital in Logan County, which is in Sterling. And we started having conversations with them, with both hospitals, about developing a memorandum of understanding, or an MOU, with the hospitals in both of those cities. And then while we're working on getting those MOUs, we needed to start working on getting the equipment that we would need for the project. So what we planned was to get 2 crash carts and stock them with all the supplies and equipment that we would need. And then we would place one of the crash carts in each of the 2 hospital emergency departments that served those 2 counties. And we felt that that would be a very efficient way that we could then restock those carts as we needed to, and we would have everything at our fingertips. We could just move the cart into whatever room we were doing our exams, and we would have everything that we needed right there. We could have a power strip that we could plug in to keep our colposcope and everything that we needed, and our camera batteries and that kind of stuff, charged up at all times, and have all of our equipment handy. And it would just be there, and we wouldn't have to worry about toting stuff, back and forth so much. So a lot of our equipment would already be right there. So that was our initial plan. So then I started out by making a spreadsheet of everything in our current exam room that we would need to have in our mobile exam room, and getting estimates for costs. So I literally went through the exam room and I listed every item that we had in the exam room. And then I listed where we could get the items purchased, what the cost was at the time that I was kind of looking at them, and then how many we would need if we would need them. Some of the things that we had in our exam rooms we didn't really need to have for this a mobile project. So I went and looked through those things and then decided how many of each item we would need. And then I put a column on the other side here for when I actually purchased it, how much it actually cost, and how much, what the difference was from the price I had initially quoted to how much I actually paid, what the difference was, whether I was over or under budget, so I could keep track of where I was on the budget that we had proposed and the grants that we had written for the actual project. And then I had a column here where I could keep track of if I'd ordered it, had I received it, where I was in the process, just to kind of keep me straight. And then this last item over here was the total cost. And then, of course, my budget item over here. So that's how I kept track of everything and just kept me on budget. I actually came in under budget completely for the whole project just by, keeping an eye on the individual line items, and I was able to come in under budget for the whole project. I will be going over some of the equipment and items that we purchased for the Mobile SANE program. Some of the smaller items I won't go over, but most of the bigger items that we needed, I will go over those. And I just want to make a disclaimer from the very beginning that I have no financial arrangement with any of the companies that I'm going to be representing as far as the items that we purchased. And I have no arrangement with the websites that we purchased from. I'm just going to tell you for your information what we purchased. You can choose your own things, however you choose to do, but I just want you to know what we ended up using. And I'll be honest with you about whether or not they worked for us and what our decisions ultimately were about these pieces of equipment. The first item, and probably the most expensive item that we had to purchase, was the colposcope. And I shouldn't say had to purchase, because you don't have to have a colposcope. We know that we can do a sexual assault exam without a colposcope, and you can use your digital camera to take external photos if there's any injury, and then you would just describe and do detailed drawings of what you see when you do your internal exam. It's not a requirement that you have a colposcope, but we wanted to have that. And we have one in our office, and the one we were using at the time was the EVA Mobile ODT, and we chose to continue with that one. We wanted to have consistency and have all of our colposcopes be the exact same, so that we weren't using one colposcope for this and one colposcope in the office. And so we chose to continue with this. The things that I liked about it was that it's very portable. If you can kind of see, it's the size of a cell phone. Actually, it is a cell phone. On the inside, it's a cell phone that has the program loaded onto it, and then the cell phone sits into the housing of the colposcope, and on the back side of that, it has the actual colposcope camera that you can get your colposcope photos with. It's very portable. It's not very big. It's easy to transport around. It's a little bit of a learning curve when you first get it and start using it, to figure out how to fine tune it to get those nice clear photos. But once you figure that out, as far as how to start out and then how to fine tune your picture once you get what you're looking for, it really takes nice pictures. So it's really a good colposcope to use, and it's pretty reasonable as far as colposcopes go for the cost. The next item that we purchased were the equipment carts, and I was actually really surprised because I thought that these were going to be really expensive. I anticipated paying a lot of money for these, and I purchased these from Armstrong Medical. They were just exactly like this, except that the ones that we purchased had the keypad lock as opposed to a key lock, and they were $717.50 a piece. So we purchased 2 of these, and then we had all of our equipment in the drawers. We did not keep any medications in the drawers, and we'll talk a little bit about medications in a little bit, but we did not keep any medications in the drawers at all. But we had all of our speculums, just all of the other equipment that we would need was kept in this. And so the idea was that we would keep that in the ED, and then as we took supplies out of there, we would replenish them so that we always had everything we needed right there at our fingertips. And it would just go into the room wherever we were seeing the patient. We did order 2 laptop computers, one for each of our nurses, so that way when you went in to do an exam, you were able to document remotely as opposed to having to handwrite everything on your notes and then come back and transcribe everything into the computer. That was just for our convenience, so that made it much easier for us to do our documentation. And for these, we spent $1,120 a piece on those laptops. The next item on my list was a digital camera, and I will say, for me, probably the most important piece of equipment that you're going to have in your kit is your camera. And if you were going to splurge on any item, I would choose to splurge on my camera. That being said, this particular camera, the one that we purchased, is very reasonable. I bought it off of Amazon. It's a Nikon D3500 DSLR camera, and it was $408.45. So it was very reasonable, and it actually works really well for our purposes, for taking photos of injuries, and it takes very clear pictures. And I'll show you some of the attachments that we bought to go with it that help us with the pictures, but it does take really good pictures. And it was reasonably priced, so we were able to both have the same camera. And then eventually we ended up purchasing them for our permanent office sites, so that all of our cameras are exactly the same, so that we have the same functions, and we're not having to try to remember, oh, this is how this camera works, this is how that camera works. We use the same camera in all of our locations and in our mobile kit as well. So when I first started out, I didn't know a lot about cameras. Again, like I said, who knew going into nursing that you needed to be a photographer? So I didn't know a lot about cameras, and so I felt that I needed to have a lens that would allow me to take up really close-up photos. And so I purchased this Nikon Micro 40mm lens, and I got this off of Amazon as well, and it was $276.95. And I purchased 2 of these, one for each of the nurses to have with our cameras that we would be doing our photos with for evidence. Another piece of equipment that you are going to want to have is a ring flash or a speed flash or something along those lines, to really be able to get consistent lighting with your photos, especially for like bruises and things like that. And so this particular one we purchased, this was the first thing that we purchased, was the ring flash. I got this again from Amazon. I bought a lot of stuff off of Amazon, and I got this for $98.97. So I purchased one for each of our cameras. And I personally, when I use it as a steady light source, not as a flash, because when you do it as a flash, you get more washout than you get if you just use it as a steady source of light when you're taking injury photos. This is another nice to have item, not a necessity. We know that we can dry our swabs without using a swab dryer. We certainly can do that. But since we were starting from scratch, we felt like if we could put this in our budget, if we could get that, then we wanted to have them. And so we decided to add it to our budget, and we were able to have the money to get these. And so we purchased 2 swab dryers, one for each of our setups, and I got these from CSI Forensic Supply for about $600 a piece. And it just makes it so much nicer that we can put these in here and have them dried within a more reasonable time as opposed to waiting for them to air dry. And that way it's that much less time that we're standing around waiting for swabs to dry so that we can finish packaging our evidence and getting it to law enforcement. Another item on your necessity list is going to be your speculums. We chose the Welch Allen Clean Spec speculum, and so then we needed the speculum light, cordless speculum light, to go with that. We needed all three sizes, a small, medium, and large, and so these came in a box of 96 for each different size, and they were $170 for a box of 96. So for each individual size, we had to order a box of 96, but we could divide those up, and they lasted us quite a while. And then we ordered the speculum light and the light charger, and they were $251 a piece for the light and the light charger base. Some of the small supplies that we purchased, I'll go through here. The first one is a blood pressure cuff, and I realize that we're going to be in an emergency room, and you would think that, you know, that's not necessary in an emergency room that we would have that. But a lot of these smaller facilities don't necessarily have this in every single room, and so they have more what we used to call them nurse on a stick, where they were a portable vital sign machine that they would take around to each individual room. And so you may or may not have the capability of doing vital signs at your fingertips in the patient room. So I felt like we needed to have that capability to do blood pressure, pulse, and a stethoscope to be able to listen to lung sounds and that kind of stuff as we're assessing our patients. So I did purchase this particular blood pressure cuff kit, and what I really like about this kit is that it comes with all sizes, because as you remember, we are a child advocacy center, and we do see victims of all ages. So we see from little tiny kids all the way up to elderly patients. And so I wanted to have blood pressure cuffs that would fit all sizes of patients. And so this really fit the bill. And it has the tubes that click on and connect on to the tubing, and then it has the little hand pump. And so these kits were $335.84, and they work great, and we really like those really a lot. I did get an otoscope for each of our kits as well, and again, that is so that we can look inside the ears. We're looking for ruptured eardrums if we have and trauma in the ears, if we have a DV situation, that's a potential for that. We're also looking for petechia inside the ear if we have a strangulation. So, it's important that we're looking inside the ear, even though you wouldn't think that would necessarily apply, but it is something important that you're looking inside the ear for some of those items. So that particular item cost us $269.40. We purchased stethoscopes. We paid $191 a piece for the stethoscopes. We got a little bit nicer stethoscopes for that. And then our pulse oximeters, we needed to have, again, like I said, we do see kids, and so we got an adult and a pediatric pulse oximeter. The adult pulse oximeter was $54.92, and the pediatric pulse oximeter was around $30. And then we also got the thermometers, and they were the infrared thermometers, and they were $15.99. And then a set of pen lights were $8, and there was several in there, and so I only had to buy the one set, and then we just put some in each kit so that we could look into the patient's eyes and check for pupil dilation and that kind of stuff. I ordered the ABFO rulers to use as a standard measure for when we're doing forensic photography, and they were $25.75, but there were multiple rulers in the package, so I just needed to put a couple of them in each of the carts, so I didn't need to order any more than just the one package of those. The Tooladine Blue is something that I felt that I wanted to have as a necessity in each of our carts for when we're doing a genital assessment. So if you see injury, you can use that Tooladine Blue to identify that area a little bit better for photography and identification. It was $89.95 for a box of Tooladine Blue. The KY gel is something we use pretty regularly, so I wanted to keep that in stock, and it was got that off of Amazon. It was $17.94 for a box of 100 packets of KY gel. Evidence tape, you never really know when you're going to need additional evidence tape. Generally speaking, there's enough evidence tape in your evidence collection kit for the specimens that you're going to have. But I know for me, if I'm going to be collecting clothing as evidence, I always need to have the evidence tape roll to be able to seal those large clothing bags, paper bags for clothing, and so I do need to use it for that. And then sometimes if I take additional samples of things, I run out of evidence tape out of the kit, so I need additional evidence tape then too. The evidence bags, again, sometimes, especially if you're doing like a drug facilitated a sexual assault, you might need to collect a urine sample and or blood sample, and you need evidence bags for that. So I ordered those, and they were $22.35 for those. Exam gloves are obviously a necessity. I ordered these off of Amazon, and I ordered 3 different sizes, and I was able to find deals on these on Amazon where I could get 10 boxes of 100 in a package deal, and it was about $70. So I did that package deal for each size, small, medium, and large. And it turns out that really for my partner and I, that the 2 nurses here, we pretty much used the medium and large and very rarely used the small. So subsequently, I would only order the medium and large after that. But we keep those in stock pretty well. And I just would order, when I order, I just order the 10 boxes of 100, and that way we have those in stock. Then the 2x2s, again, I got those off of Amazon, and they were $11.79 for a 5-pack of 200, just a sleeve of 200 2x2s. And then the urine cups, again, for collecting urine specimens for drug facilitated sexual assault. You can get 100 for $24.99 on Amazon. I did not actually have to order these for ourselves because they had been, the person before me had them ordered, and I had a huge box in the closet that were still able to be used, and so I didn't need them right away. And then the Foley catheters, we use these to insert into the hymen and then inflate the bulb and pull back on it so that we can inspect the hymen. And they were $19.42. I was able to get them off of Amazon. So that was helpful. It took us a little bit to be able to do that. We had to have a physician's license number to be able to order them off of Amazon. So our medical director was able to help me with that, and we were able to order this medical supplies off of Amazon for that. And then lastly are the evidence collection kits. These are available from Searchy at no cost. You just contact them and order these Colorado sexual assault evidence collection kits. And I usually order, for our program, I usually order like 10 to 20 at a time, depending on how busy we've been. And they just will mail them out to us, no problems. As with any project, you learn lessons along the way from your mistakes or things that you could have done better or done differently. So these are a couple of things that we learned as we went along. The first thing was the equipment carts that we purchased. When we first started this, we decided with the emergency department staff director that we would had a certain place that we were going to keep the cart, and it would stay plugged in so that our camera battery and our colposcope would be charged up for when we came in to do an exam. What we found actually was that the hospital's ED staff would move our cart because it would be in their way. And so when we would get there, oftentimes we would spend about 30 minutes playing Where's Waldo looking for our cart because we couldn't find it, and no one that was there ever seemed to know where it was. And so we would have to go around looking for it. And then once we found it, a lot of times the power strip was not plugged in, and so our camera battery might be completely dead, or the colposcope might be not completely charged, or not have enough charge to get through an exam, and so we would have to charge it before we could do an exam, which was very frustrating. One of the hospitals actually even lost the stand for our colposcope, and we had to replace that. So it became pretty evident pretty quickly that that was going to be a problem. We again after that identified another place that they thought would be appropriate for us to keep it, and keep it plugged in. And then again, the next time we went, it wasn't there and wasn't plugged in again. And so we just had to keep going back to that and revisiting that, and it was problematic. So we eventually decided that it would be better for us to try to make this a truly mobile program. And so what we did is we purchased a large suitcase and a tackle box. And in the tackle box, we had, in the bottom part, it had our evidence tape, it had masks, it had our stethoscope, it had additional slides, envelopes for the individual, extra envelopes for the individual collection items. We had 2x2s, KY gel, Tuluidine blue, specimen bags, just pretty much everything that we needed in here. Additional swabs, ink pens, markers, tape, just everything that we had in in the cart that we needed. We had in this, in these tackle boxes, just maybe not in as much number as we had, but we had a par number that we would keep in these tackle boxes, and then whoever opened it, whoever used it, it was your responsibility to restock that after you did an exam. So that was the tackle box that had all of that stuff in it. And then we had a swab dryer in the suitcase, and these, when you put them in there sideways, they fit in there perfectly. We had our blood pressure cuff, we had our thermometer, we had our pulse oxes, we had our evidence collection kit. At the top in those zipper pouches, we had speculums, and on the outside, we had our folders for our advocates to use when they came in with us. And so we pretty much had everything in there. The only things that weren't in there was the camera and the colposcope and the colposcope stand. So pretty much when you went out for an exam, you had to grab your suitcase and your camera and camera battery, and then your colposcope and stand. And there's actually room in the suitcase that you could put your camera in there, or your colposcope, whichever one. I usually put my colposcope in there because my camera is easy to carry because it's got a carrying case, and so I would put my colposcope in there, and then I just make sure I get my camera battery and the light for my speculums, and I'd be ready to go. So I just kind of got used to grabbing those few things and be on my way. As I mentioned before, who knew that you would end up being a photographer on top of being a nurse? But I learned a lot about photography when I went to a forensic photography class, and learned a lot about taking these injury photos. It was very helpful. And what I actually figured out from that was that the camera that we had was actually just fine for what we needed, and that we had no need, honestly, for these micro lenses. And so we never use them. And I would not, if I had it all to do over again, I wouldn't have spent the money on these additional lenses that we purchased, because we honestly never use them. And so it was a waste of funds that we could have spent on other things. It just wasn't something that we needed to have for our program. Let's talk a little bit about staffing. Staffing can be very challenging when you're working in a rural program. So these are some of the things that we dealt with our staffing. When we started this, I was the only nurse on staff at Sarah House. So, I was looking in the community, and there were very few seasoned SANE nurses in the area. There were a few that had taken the training and had practiced as a SANE at some point, but they pretty much all had this been there, done that attitude, and they did not want to, for one reason or another, be participating in being on call for SANE and participating in the SANE program. Um, they might have gone on to other things. They might have been in school. Some, were busy with their family and just didn't feel that they had the time to commit to it. And I just didn't have any luck recruiting any of those nurses that had experience into the program. So then I tried some recruiting efforts in the hospital with the ED nurses and L&D nurses, as those are usually pretty good fits for SANE nurses. So I went and talked with those groups, and just did not have much luck in that area either, trying to recruit people from there. So then we kind of decided that we would grow our own nurses and find some people that had an interest in being a SANE nurse, and mentor them and train them up, have them take the training and mentor them through this, and help them to learn how to be a SANE nurse and train them in our program. That became problematic because training and maintaining competency was an issue. Um, the positives were that the training is free, and then also of course, the Colorado SANE Safe Project has a clinical skills lab, and they also have a preceptorship program to allow the SANE nurses to shadow their nurses and actually work a shift and do exams. And so those are some really great positives as far as the program goes. But maintaining competency in this rural area is really difficult, because we don't get a ton of exams for them to keep their competency up. So that became a challenge for us in getting these nurses. So we were able to find a nurse. Actually, we have had 3 nurses now that have gone through and done this, but keeping their competency up has been a challenge. And the first couple that came through the program didn't stay with it, and so we invested a lot of time training and working with them, and they just didn't last for whatever reason. As far as the call schedule goes, we decided that, well, initially it was just me on call, and so that it really wasn't a hardship, because we were getting maybe 3 calls a month, something like that. So it wasn't a hardship for me. But once we have another nurse now that is on staff with me, we chose to do our call schedule a week at a time. Again, it's not a hardship because we're not getting called out every night or have multiple cases a day or anything like that. And so it's just really not a difficult thing. And so that seems to work for us. We feel like, we just take a week and then the next nurse takes the next week, and it just works out that is pretty good for us, and we're okay with that. You have to kind of look at your area and decide what works for you, and how that's going to impact your nurses, as far as your staffing goes. Um, the call response time, at the very beginning when we first started, we wanted to be able to say that we would respond within an hour regardless, which isn't feasible because some of the places we respond to are more than an hour away. So we put in the first two that we places that we got MOUs with were within an hour easily, and so we tried to say that we'd be there within an hour, but that wasn't always feasible either because we might be somewhere where we had to go back home and get our kit, or it's whatever might be a barrier that would prevent us from meeting that hour call time. And so that we wanted to make sure that we could meet that time frame. And so it became really challenging for us to figure out what was the best way to word that when we did future MOUs, that we could deliver on what we said we were going to do. So I think that was a big lesson learned on that front, is that on our response times that we're not over promising and under delivering. So we would eventually we went to putting in the MOU something along the lines of that we would respond within a reasonable time frame. During the daytime, during the week, we might be in the middle of a forensic interview or a exam resulting from a forensic interview, and so we might be already doing something, and we can't just stop that in the middle and respond to a sex assault. So that was something we had to take into account for too. So we felt that just putting that we would respond within a reasonable time. As time has gone on, we have really felt like that responding to these very remote areas in the middle of the night is not always the best in our best interest either, because we're tired. What if you hit a deer or whatever, driving out in the middle of nowhere? And so we really we listen to see what the situation is with the victim when they call. If it's something that we can feasibly have the victim come back the next day, in these remote areas, we will have them let the patient go home once they've cleared them medically, and then set up a time the next day where we can go during the daytime and meet them during the day if they're okay with that. And that way they can get some rest, and just everybody's on a little bit clearer head, and come back the next day and we'll do the exam at that time, as long as we're still within the time frame for evidence collection. And so we've started doing that some, and it's been okay. We don't really have a lot of times that the victims are just adamant that they don't want to do that. And if they don't want to do that, we'll go and do it. We're not going to turn the victim away, obviously, but we want to make it what's best for everybody, and our nurses, we want to make it best for the nurses as well. So that's one of the things that we have done. Let's go back and talk a little bit about the Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU. So when we started this out, we initially just made contact with the CNO or the CEO or the ED director, whoever was the most appropriate person at that organization to talk with about getting an MOU initiated. And so I would schedule a meeting with them, and initially what I did was I took a draft MOU that we had drawn up, to the organization and sat down with them and talked about what our services were, what kinds of things we offered, what kinds of victims we would see, um, pretty much everything that art would entail. I would give them a copy of the draft MOU that outlined everything that we would do for the victims and what our responsibilities were and what the hospital's responsibilities were. We would take a tour of the ED. We would look at spaces that were in the ED, to talk about where would we feasibly be able to do an exam, because we would need a room with walls and a door, not just a cubicle with a curtain, so we had privacy for the victims. We would talk about how medication administration would work, because since don't have privileges at that hospital, and for us to get privileges and to maintain privileges, was it feasible for us to do that, or how would it best work for us to get medications administered to our victims? And then we talked about how the medical records part of that would work. Would they have access to our confidential medical record from the victim from the sexual assault exam, or how exactly would all those things work? So we would spend some time talking with the organization about all those things initially. So once the MOU is signed, we would provide in-person training with the ED providers and the nursing staff, and we would talk to them about the services provided by Sarah House, how they would get us to respond, what the SANE exam actually entails, so that they understand what we're doing in there and why it takes so long for us to be able to complete that exam. We talked to them about the medication administration, because what we decided was that we would counsel the patient and talk with them about their immunization status and prophylaxis for sexually transmitted infections, and then we would, with the patient, decide what medications they needed. We had our medication protocol, which comes from the CDC, and then we would hand that off to the nurse to take to the ED physician, and the ED physician would then order the medications, and the ED nurse would be the one that would administer those medications. So we actually never touch the medications, and the nurses are the ones that actually do the medication administration. We also talked to them about the medical records. We decided that our medical records belong to us, and so they would just document when we came that they turned the care over to us for a sexual assault exam, and then when we finished with the sexual assault exam, we would turn the care back over to them, and they could do their discharge part of it. And so that's pretty much the standard of care that we chose to use. Because we didn't have access to their medical charts. We had no way to document on their medical charts, and it just really wasn't feasible for us to try to maintain that competency in that hospital. And then the last thing about when once the MOU was signed, is that I do a lot of training about strangulation. I've received a lot of training about strangulation. It's something I've become really passionate about. So pretty much anytime I have a captive audience, I talk about strangulation. And so once I go through everything that they need to know about the actual SANE exam and the process that they need to go through and what that process entails, then I do actual strangulation training with them so that they understand how dangerous strangulation is and what they need to be looking for in a strangulation victim and how to screen for the strangulations and those kinds of things. So it's just taking advantage of that opportunity to do some training and education with the staff. As we talked about earlier, we started out with 2 facilities that we sort of targeted for initial SANE, mobile SANE, and we got MOUs with both of those hospitals. It was not a quick process. Both of these hospitals have corporate ownerships, and so those MOUs had to go through corporate, through their legal departments, and it was a very lengthy process to get those accomplished. But we did get them done eventually, and so we had those 2 MOUs. And then Since we've started that and we're successful in being able to have an MOU with those 2 facilities, since that time we have now added an additional 8 facilities that we have MOUs with. There's currently only 1 facility remaining in our district that we have not gotten an MOU with, and that is the hospital that's in Kit Carson County in Burlington, and they are on my radar. We will be approaching them at some point and talking to them about joining with us as far as partnering and being able to provide that service there if that's something that they're willing to do. I want to thank you for joining this webinar today. I hope that you found it to be helpful and informative. If you would, please take a few moments to complete the survey that is attached to one of the QR codes down below. I appreciate your time and I appreciate your attendance today. Thank you. Again, thank you for your time and attendance. Have a great day.